All right, bag B, which like bag A contains a million bags within it. This is going to get into the rear suspension assembly, and it begins with CVDs, or CVAs, I guess they have to call them, for the rear, and then you're going to assemble up the rear hubs. So let me go ahead and get started on that. The CVA assembly is pretty much just what you would expect. Nothing special there. The standard way of putting those together that we've seen for many years. Now the rear hub carriers are super heavy duty. These things are thick. They're also fairly small, so all the material is compacted into a small area. And they use 5x10 bearings, 5x10x4 bearings on the inside. You have a little crush spacer in the middle. The outer bearing is a 5x13x4 monster, which is just going to be able to take so much force. I mean, that's the largest outer bushing or outer bearing that I've seen on any 1/10 scale vehicle. I've seen them that large on the inside, that large on the outer diameter, but actually never that thick in these hubs. So that is definitely designed for maximum durability and taking some big hits. So big ups to Losi for going above and beyond with the strength there, because we all know that on buggies, something that's very common to go bad on these things would be anything towards the end of the suspension. So hub carriers, steering knuckles, and front C blocks, all those kind of things. I don't think you're going to see a lot of these breaking. Now when I first assembled the axles into the hub, I immediately felt the telltale signs of a bearing being crushed, where you could actually feel the little bit of wobble in there as the balls in the ball joint are actually being forced to roll around with a lot more friction than they want. As it turns out, when you first put in that 5x13, that outer bearing, it might not want to seat in all the way. So be sure to make sure that that one is completely in as far as it will go. Push it in with a little bit of force when you're initially inserting it. On one side, that gave me a nice smooth feel. On the other side, even after pushing it in all the way, I still had a lot of tightness in there, and I was not comfortable with it at all. I took the whole thing back apart and actually just very ever so lightly dremeled just a slight bit of material from the base of where that outer bearing seats in, so that it could go in just a slight bit more, just a tiniest fraction of a millimeter, probably 0.1, 0.2 millimeters at most. And now that's actually a lot smoother, and it can actually just rotate freely without there being play back and forth. I mean, I can feel just the very slightest amount of play, barely, if I really pay attention to it a lot. So watch out for that. Make sure that when you assemble this, the rear hubs, you don't have an unnecessary amount of friction when you turn them. Make sure that it feels smooth. If it doesn't feel smooth, then you're going to need to reseat that outer bearing. This is very important because that will give you a lot of heat, premature wear of the bearing, possibly even overheating of this plastic. It could get a little bit warped. You'll also be putting too much strain on your motor, your speed control, your battery, and everything. So that's something you want to get right. I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but this kit does use E-clips. The rear outer hinge pins are secured with the E-clips on either side. There they are down there. So sorry for the folks who absolutely hate E-clips. You will have to put up with 4 of them. In assembling the rear suspension pin holders, or the suspension arm mounts, onto the rear, everything goes together pretty well, but there is one little detail here in the form of this tiny screw, which is pretty much just used to hold things together while you go off and do other steps. It's just to keep the whole rear clip from falling off as you do the transmission and all. And the problem is that I don't know how large that hex head is, but it's tiny and it's smaller than anything that I had as far as a driver is concerned. So just watch out for that. I ended up using, fortunately, like I said, it's not a structural component. I ended up using a very small jeweler's flathead screwdriver that just fit across it, and I was able to tighten it down enough, and I used a little bit of Loctite to make sure it doesn't fall out. But man, what were they thinking? There's your rear assembly coming together a little bit more. This is the back of the battery box, the battery tray, so to speak, and it also has a little bit of bracing that's going to ultimately help deal with strains from the shock tower. And your ESC mount is right here, and you can see your camera link mounts are in board right here. Shock tower just mounts by 4 screws straight in from the top. It has this nice wide horizontal base to it and gives it enough bracing because it has a large enough area to it, and just 4 screws is all it takes. And there it is, rear suspension pretty much assembled, just needs the shocks. But coming up next will be the transmission, which is going to start with the differential.